Tonight, we embark on a journey through the Hagia Sophia, a monument whose stones whisper tales of three empires' triumphs and declines. From a Christian cathedral to an imperial mosque, then a secular museum, and once more a mosque, this enduring edifice has withstood quakes, crusades, and political upheavals. Before we delve deeper, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel, but only if you love our work. Share in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is there. Our tales can be gripping, but we're crafting some dull ones too, we promise. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for a gentle hum, and let's unravel tonight's story together. It all started in a city ablaze. In 532 AD, Constantinople, the Byzantine Empire's heart, was gripped by chaos. The Nika riots turned streets into war zones. Flames devoured homes, palaces, and even churches. Amid the wreckage stood the ruins of an earlier basilica, once called the Church of Holy Wisdom. For Emperor Justinian I, this devastation was a chance. Where others saw rubble, he envisioned a new beginning. He wouldn't merely restore a church. He aimed to create the grandest sacred structure ever seen. Not as a nod to loss, but as a bold statement of power, divine favor, and imperial might. A temple to rival Solomon's own. He entrusted this vision to two men, Anthemius of Tralles and Isidore of Miletus. Not architects as we know them, but a mathematician and a physicist, thinkers, dreamers. They conceived a space unlike any before, a vast central dome that appeared to float, bathed in light, perched on a circle of windows that brought the heavens nearer. Construction started swiftly. Marble was sourced from far-off quarries in Egypt and Anatolia. Columns were salvaged from ancient temples. Gold, silver, and gems arrived, not just for beauty, but to awe, to humble, to overwhelm. In just 5 years, a feat for such ambition, the Hagia Sophia stood complete. On its dedication day, Justinian stepped inside, pride evident. Beneath the glowing dome, he murmured words that linger through ages. "Solomon, I have outdone you." The Hagia Sophia was more than a church. It was a symbol, the empire's crown, blending the divine with the imperial, faith with power. To Constantinople's people, it wasn't just a worship site. It was a marvel, a pledge, proof their city and empire were divinely chosen. Yet history would challenge that vow. Stone endures, but time is unforgiving. Once built, the Hagia Sophia came alive. Byzantines didn't just visit, they entered in reverence. Crossing its marble threshold, the world's clamor faded. Inside, the air was cool, heavy with incense, alive with echoes, Greek chants, footsteps, the quiet sobs of pilgrims struck by the sight. The dome, nearly 100 feet across, seemed to hover weightlessly, as if the sky itself had descended. 40 windows at its base poured golden light, making the dome seem to float. Light wasn't mere adornment, it was theology. To Byzantines, light was God's presence, flowing like water. Everything was intentional. Marble walls gleamed with veined hues, greens from Thessaly, purples from Egypt, pinks from Phrygia. The floors bore geometric mosaics. Columns, repurposed from ancient temples, folded time into itself. The space felt timeless, as if heaven kissed earth. Yet the Hagia Sophia was more than architecture. It was the stage for imperial rites. Emperors were crowned here. Patriarchs delivered sermons blending faith and politics. Beneath the dome, a Byzantine ruler was more than a man. He was God's chosen. On feast days, the church pulsed with life. Candles glowed in every nook. Choirs sang with ethereal clarity, their voices rising to the dome, melting into light. Sacred icons, Christ Pantocrator, Theotokos, saints, angels, shone in candlelight, not mere art, but gateways to the divine. To stand in the Hagia Sophia was to feel small, yet embraced by something grander than empire or history, something holy. For nearly 7 centuries, it shaped the Byzantine soul, enduring turmoil, theological disputes, and quakes. But as the church stood firm, the world around it began to change. One day, those changes would reach its gates, not with whispers, but with swords and flames. It was 1204. The empire that crowned its rulers beneath the Hagia Sophia's dome had weakened, frayed by plots, rivalries, and debts. Constantinople's people never foresaw the coming storm. They thought the Crusaders were friends. The Fourth Crusade had aimed for Jerusalem, a holy quest, but it veered into betrayal. Twisted by debts, politics, and broken oaths, the Crusaders turned not to the Holy Land but to Constantinople. They didn't pray at the city's walls, they scaled them. Inside, they didn't seek redemption, they sought plunder. The sacking was merciless. For 3 days, Crusaders looted, burned, and ravaged. They stormed homes, defiled relics, seized what they could: gold, silver, icons, manuscripts. But the Hagia Sophia's violation cut deepest. This sacred wonder of Christendom became a scene of desecration. Soldiers drove horses down its marble paths, smashed the altar, stole chalices, and mocked sacred rites. A prostitute, it said, sat on the patriarch's throne in a profane act. The Hagia Sophia's sanctity, its silence, its reverence, was stripped away. For nearly 60 years, it was no longer Byzantine, serving the Latin Church under foreign rulers who ignored its past and meaning. Yet the Hagia Sophia endured. In 1261, Byzantines reclaimed their city. They returned to their scarred cathedral, its holy walls marred by violence and neglect. Slowly, they revived it, not just in stone but in spirit. Golden mosaics were revealed again. Chants resumed. But something had shifted. The empire bore the wounds of humiliation, its trust shattered, its treasure defiled. The Hagia Sophia stood, but now it held a shadow, not of glory, but of betrayal. And though it weathered this storm, a greater one loomed from the east, unstoppable. In spring 1453, Constantinople's skies were calm, but the earth shook with an approaching army. Sultan Mehmed II, only 21, came to seize the city for the Ottoman Empire. He wielded a new weapon: gunpowder. Cannon fire pounded the ancient walls day after day, smoke darkening the sky. Within, hope dwindled. When the walls finally cracked, the Ottomans surged through. Before chaos peaked, many citizens fled to the Hagia Sophia, believing its sanctity, history, and dome would shield them. Men, women, children, priests, nobles huddled beneath it, praying, weeping, waiting. Some clutched columns, others sang hymns. Fear and faith filled the air. The doors burst open. Yet Mehmed didn't order destruction. He entered quietly, gazing at the dome, its 40 windows catching daylight. In that moment, history turned. He decreed the Hagia Sophia be spared, transformed not into ruins, but a mosque. Prayers were called at once. A muezzin ascended the pulpit, and the Islamic call to prayer rang out, new yet held by the same walls. Mosaics were covered, the altar removed, a mihrab added to face Mecca. Minarets rose at the corners, slender and tall, but the structure's core remained. Its soul, perhaps, merely changed garments. For Ottomans, this was triumph, the world's crown passing from Rome to Istanbul. For Byzantines, it was the end. The Hagia Sophia had seen coronations, betrayals, and now conquest, becoming more than a church or symbol, a mirror of empire itself. Under the crescent moon, it began anew. Mehmed II, the conqueror, didn't just take a city, he claimed its soul. The Hagia Sophia was his greatest prize. He ordered it cleansed, purified, and made a mosque. This wasn't destruction, but rebirth. Christian relics were carefully removed. Icons and mosaics of human forms were plastered over, not destroyed. A mihrab marked Mecca's direction. A minbar was added for sermons. Carpets softened the floors for worshippers. Minarets rose outside, their calls echoing across Istanbul. The Ottomans revered what they had won. Mehmed prayed there, as would future sultans. This was no ordinary mosque. It was imperial, a gem in the Ottoman crown, inspiring architects like Mimar Sinan, whose career was shaped by studying and surpassing its brilliance. Under his care, the Hagia Sophia was fortified against quakes, adorned with calligraphy, fountains, and tiles. Yet its Christian roots lingered, angels and mosaics hidden beneath plaster, the Virgin and Child waiting behind paint. Every prayer added a thread to its rich tapestry. The faithful flocked, scholars studied in its shade, and the empire's great festivals filled its walls. It was a mosque, yes, but also a museum of memory, where centuries' voices layered like dust. For 5 centuries, it was the heart of Ottoman spiritual life, a place where power bowed to faith, where stone held its history. Yet time always challenges what humans seek to preserve. The Hagia Sophia endured wars, conquests, and spiritual shifts, but not the silent tremors beneath Istanbul's fault lines. The city shakes, and the Hagia Sophia sways. Its dome, a marvel suspended high, had collapsed once in Justinian's time. Even under Ottoman care, it groaned. Cracks formed, walls shifted, the dome's weight straining its supports. But the Ottomans were diligent stewards, valuing it as a monument and place of prayer. They summoned Mimar Sinan, not just a builder, but an artist, engineer, and historian. He approached the Hagia Sophia with care, reinforcing its dome, strengthening piers, adding buttresses to bear its weight, not to alter its essence, but to ensure its survival. He studied Byzantine methods, enhancing them. He didn't erase history. He preserved it, knowing the Hagia Sophia was more than stone. It was a dialogue across ages, deserving to endure. Through his work and later restorers, it withstood quakes, storms, and times where, never falling, always drawing eyes upward. Foreign travelers who entered the mosque during the 17th and 18th centuries wrote of their awe, even after visiting the grand mosques of the Ottoman world, many, designed by Sinan himself, they found the Hagia Sophia different, quieter, older, wiser. It had seen so much, carried so many prayers, watched as empires changed names, languages, gods, and still it stood. Cracks may have crept across its dome. The colors may have faded, but the light, still filtered down through those 40 windows, just as it had for over 1,000 years. The building remained silent, but never asleep. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world around the Hagia Sophia had changed again. The Ottoman Empire, once vast and powerful, was fading into history. A new nation was rising from its ashes, the Republic of Turkey, and with it came new ideas, new values, and a bold vision for the future. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, the founder of this republic, looked at the Hagia Sophia not just as a place of worship, but as a symbol caught between worlds. To him, it represented both the weight of the past and the potential for a new identity. In 1935, he made a radical decision, one that would echo across continents. The Hagia Sophia would become a museum, not a church, not a mosque, but a neutral space, a place where the layers of history could coexist, visible and undisturbed. For the first time in nearly 1,400 years, it would belong to no one faith, but to all of humanity. Restorers began to peel away the layers of plaster that had long hidden the Christian mosaics. Bit by bit, forgotten faces emerged. The Virgin Mary, Christ, Pantocrator, the archangels, their expressions soft, almost dreamlike. They had waited patiently in the dark for centuries, and yet the Islamic elements remained too. The great medallions with the names of Allah, the Prophet Muhammad, and the early caliphs still hung high on the walls. The Arabic calligraphy, elegant and flowing, shared space with the golden halos of saints. For visitors, it was unlike anything else in the world. You could stand beneath the dome and see both a cross and a crescent. You could feel the passage of empires in every stone. It was no longer just a sacred space. It had become a mirror reflecting the complexity of belief, power, and memory. Tourists arrived from around the world. Scholars wrote books. Artists found inspiration in its symmetry and its scars. And through it all, the Hagia Sophia stood still, not frozen but calm, watching, remembering. In silence, it told its story, not one of division, but of layers, not of ownership, but of continuity. And for a time that silence was enough. Silence, though peaceful, never lasts forever. In July of 2020, after decades, as a museum, the Hagia Sophia once again stood at the heart of a global conversation. Turkey's highest court ruled that its 1935 conversion into a museum had been unlawful. Within hours, the government announced that the Hagia Sophia would return to its role as a mosque. It was not the first time this space had changed, but the world, now more connected than ever, felt the shift deeply. Some saw it as a revival, a return to tradition, to faith, to history. Others feared it was a retreat from secular ideals, a step backward in a fragile balance between past and present. But the Hagia Sophia, as always, stood quietly at the center, untouched by noise, carrying the weight of both celebration and sorrow. The changes were made with reverence. Large carpets were laid to cover the marble floors during prayer. The mosaics depicting Christian figures were gently veiled during services using soft, non-damaging methods. No chisels, no paint, just cloth, light, and respect. And when prayers echoed once more beneath the dome, they blended with 1,000 years of memory. The call to prayer rang out from ministers that had watched over the city since the 15th century. Inside, the space filled with breath, with whispers, with devotion. But it did not close its doors. Visitors still came from every country, every background. They marveled at the dome, the mosaics, the calligraphy, the sense of awe that seemed to cling to the air. Whether one came to worship, to admire, or simply to listen, the building welcomed them. Because Hagia Sophia had become more than a place of religion. It had become a symbol of endurance, a structure that had never crumbled, not under siege, not under politics, not under the shifting tides of belief. Its strength was not just architectural, it was spiritual, a resilience not of stone, but of meaning. In that moment, it was not just a mosque, not just a museum, and not just a church. It was all of them and none of them at once. As night falls over Istanbul and the lights of the city flicker on like stars reborn, the Hagia Sophia still stands unmoved, unshaken, unbroken. It has seen emperors crowned and dynasties fall. It has echoed with the songs of choirs, the chants of imams, the gasps of tourists, and the hushed awe of wandering souls. It has held silence when words would not do. It has been sacred to the many and yet belonged to no one entirely. That is what makes it extraordinary. For over 1,500 years, it has stood at the crossroads of civilizations: Greek, Roman, Byzantine, Ottoman, Turkish, Christian, and Muslim, East and West. And in every era, it was never just a building. It was a mirror, reflecting the hopes, fears, victories, and scars of each generation that touched it. Step beneath its dome, and you step into history's bloodstream. You'll feel it in the cool marble under your feet, in the light that spills from high windows like liquid gold, in the quiet breath of space so vast it humbles the heart. You'll feel it in the tension between what is seen and what is hidden. The mosaics asleep behind curtains, the calligraphy still watching from the walls. The Hagia Sophia doesn't speak with words. It speaks with time. It teaches that identity is layered, not fixed. That beauty can be born from both reverence and ruin. That the sacred does not belong to one people or language. It belongs to those who choose to see it. And perhaps that is why it still matters. Because in a world that moves too fast, that forgets too easily, there is comfort in knowing that some things still stand. That the same dome which once looked down on Justinian, memed Ataturk, and millions of anonymous souls still looks down tonight, unchanged, watching, remembering. It is not just old, it is alive. So as you drift into sleep tonight, imagine standing beneath that dome. No noise, just breath, just light. The Hagia Sophia doesn't ask to be understood, only witnessed and perhaps quietly loved. Charles Darwin was born on February 12, 1809 in Shrewsbury, England, into a family of wealth, intellect, and expectation. His father was a respected doctor. His grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, had already toyed with early ideas of evolution. Ideas, however, that Charles would not yet understand. As a boy, Charles wasn't exceptional by academic standards. In fact, he struggled with traditional schooling. But outside the classroom, among beetles, birds, and bubbling brooks, his curiosity thrived. He collected shells, dissected insects, wondered about fossils, nature, fascinated him far more than Latin grammar ever could. When he was 16, his father sent him to study medicine at the University of Edinburgh, hoping his son would follow in his footsteps. But Charles was uneasy with surgery and bored by lectures. He found more joy attending natural history lectures and joining local scientific societies. Seeing his son's disinterest in medicine, his father then sent him to Cambridge to study for the clergy, a respectable path for a young gentleman. Ironically, it was at Cambridge that Charles deepened his love of science. He collected beetles obsessively and studied natural theology, which tried to explain God through the perfection of nature. But fate, as it often does, would take an unexpected turn. It arrived in the form of a letter offering Charles a place aboard a naval ship about to journey around the world. He wasn't the first choice. He was young, inexperienced, and unsure of himself. But Charles Darwin said yes. That decision, quiet, almost hesitant, would change not only his life, but the entire way we understand life on Earth. In December 1831, the HMS Beagle set sail from Plymouth with a young Charles Darwin aboard as the ship's naturalist. The voyage was meant to last 2 years. It stretched into 5. The Beagle's mission was to chart the coasts of South America, but for Darwin, it became something far more personal, a journey into the unknown corners of nature and of thought. He observed, recorded, and collected specimens with tireless dedication. From barnacles and birds to rocks and fossils, everything fascinated him. He filled notebooks with sketches and thoughts. He sent crates of samples back to England. He watched the land, the creatures, and the people with quiet intensity. South America revealed nature's diversity. In Brazil, he marveled at the rainforest. In Argentina, he studied fossils of massive, extinct mammals, strangely similar to modern ones. The patterns whispered questions he couldn't yet answer. And then came the Galapagos. The islands looked barren at first, but they were rich with mystery. Each island had finches, similar yet not quite the same. Tortoises with differently shaped shells. These weren't random differences. They hinted at adaptation, at change, at something far deeper. Darwin collected without fully understanding. He didn't yet know that these birds and beasts would haunt him for years, but they stayed with him in his mind, in his journals. The voyage continued through Tahiti, Australia, and Africa. He encountered earthquakes, volcanoes, and tribal cultures. He saw how nature shaped people and how people in turn shaped the land. He saw life as connected, not static, but shifting, always responding. When the Beagle finally returned in 1836, Darwin was no longer the same man. He came back not just with collections, but with questions, and the world he thought he knew no longer made perfect sense. When Darwin returned to England in 1836, he was only 27, but already carrying the weight of something profound. His cabinets were full of specimens. His notebooks were dense with observations, but buried among the feathers, bones, and fossils was a question that quietly unsettled him. Why did species vary so slightly from island to island? Why did extinct animals so closely resemble the living ones in the same regions? Most scientists of the time believed that species were fixed, created once, unchanged forever. But Darwin had seen too much. Change was everywhere. Variation was not the exception. It was the rule. Still, he said nothing publicly. For now, he focused on sorting, organizing, and publishing his findings. His work on geology and barnacles earned him respect. In scientific circles, he became a quiet, constant presence, not flamboyant, not outspoken, but trusted. And while he wrote about rocks and reefs, a storm was forming in his mind. He began to read widely. One book in particular, an essay on the principle of population by Thomas Malthus, had a profound effect on him. Malthus argued that populations grow faster than resources, leading to competition. Not everyone survives. To Darwin, it clicked. In nature, those individuals with slight advantages, sharper claws, better camouflage, stronger wings, were more likely to survive and reproduce. Over generations, those traits would become common. It was natural selection. The mechanism was so simple, yet so powerful, it explained the diversity of life, the extinction of the unfit, the spread of the adapted. It was a quiet revolution of thought. But it was dangerous to suggest that species, including humans, were not divinely fixed, but shaped by survival, and chance was to challenge everything: religion, tradition, identity. So Darwin did not rush. He tested his ideas. He bred pigeons. He studied barnacles for 8 years. He looked for flaws in his own theory. And all the while he kept writing. In secret, he filled notebook after notebook, knowing that if he ever dared to publish, the world would not be kind. Still, the idea grew stronger, and Darwin grew more certain. By the early 1840s, Charles Darwin had a theory that could shake the world. But instead of rushing to reveal it, he stepped back. He married his cousin, Emma Wedgwood, and they settled into a quiet life at Down House in the English countryside. The world saw a gentle country gentleman, a man who gardened, raised children, and studied barnacles. But behind the calm exterior, Darwin's mind never stopped turning. His health began to fail. He suffered from chronic nausea, fatigue, and mysterious ailments that came and went in waves. Whether the illness was physical, psychological, or both, no one could say, but it kept him close to home and close to his work. From his study at Down House, Darwin continued to observe, experiment, and write. He studied earthworms, weeds, orchids, and pigeon breeding. Every detail of nature mattered. Every small variation offered a clue. He filled journals with thoughts he dared not share. He wrote long essays on his theory, quietly building a case brick. Darwin was stunned. His life's work, the idea he had guarded so carefully, now lived in someone else's hands, too. And Wallace, unaware of Darwin's long labor, was preparing to publish. Darwin's friends, Charles Lyell and Joseph Hooker, urged him to act. They arranged a joint presentation of both men's findings at the Linnean Society in London in July 1858. It was a quiet event. Few attendees grasped its importance, but Darwin knew what it meant. His time had come. He began writing feverishly, condensing decades of thought into a single accessible book. He worked not with flair, but with clarity. Always careful, always methodical. He did not claim to overthrow faith. He only asked readers to look at nature and to follow the evidence. On November 24th, 1859, his book was published on the origin of species by means of natural selection. It was not an attack. It was a revelation. The book opened with simple observations, variations among domestic animals, the role of selective breeding. Then it expanded outward, revealing a quiet, vast mechanism by which life changed generation by generation. There were no miracles, just time, pressure, advantage, adaptation. It was elegant and terrifying. The public reaction was swift and divided. Some hailed the book as genius. Others condemned it as heresy. Newspapers mocked it. Clergy denounced it. Scientists debated it. And the question began to ripple through Victorian society. If all life evolved by natural law, what did that mean for humanity? Darwin stayed mostly quiet. He avoided public debates. He let the storm swirl around him while he remained at Down House, writing, observing, thinking. He knew the controversy was only beginning, but he also knew that truth, once spoken, cannot be unspoken. The door was open, and the world, ready or not, had stepped into a new age of understanding. The publication of On the Origin of Species in 1859 sent quiet tremors through the foundations of society, tremors that would soon become earthquakes across Europe and beyond. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection ignited intense debate. For scientists, it offered a unifying explanation for life's diversity. For theologians, it posed difficult questions. If species weren't fixed, what did that say about the story of creation, about humanity's place in the universe? Church Leaders responded with sermons and pamphlets. Darwin was accused of reducing man to an animal, of robbing nature of divine purpose. His idea challenged not only religious doctrine, but Victorian pride. To some, the notion that humans were cousins of apes was unthinkable, even insulting. And yet, within the scientific world, something remarkable was happening. Many began to accept it cautiously, sometimes reluctantly, not because they liked it, but because it explained so much. Fossils, geography, anatomy, genetics, though not yet understood, would one day confirm what Darwin could only guess at. But through it all, Darwin remained. Still, he did not rush to defend himself in lecture halls. He left the fiery debates to others like Thomas Huxley, who earned the nickname Darwin's Bulldog for his fierce defense of evolution. Darwin's health, still fragile, kept him at home. But even in the quiet of Down House, he continued to work. He wrote book after book, expanding and deepening his ideas about orchids, barnacles, worms, and the expression of emotion in humans and animals. He explored how life wasn't just shaped by competition, but also by cooperation, by beauty, by behavior. He never claimed his theory answered every question. He was careful to admit what he did not know, and in private he wrestled with what he had unleashed. He worried about its implications. He knew it would disturb many, including his beloved wife, Emma. But he also believed that truth mattered, not truth shouted, not truth weaponized, but truth observed, measured, tested. Darwin didn't change the world with anger or revolution. He did it with quiet thought, patient work, and the courage to follow where the evidence led. By the 1860s, Charles Darwin had become one of the most recognized and controversial figures in science. But even as debates raged in pulpits and newspapers, Darwin remained steady. He was not a provocator. He did not seek to tear down faith or provoke conflict. He simply continued to observe life slowly, carefully, and to write. Each of his books revealed a new piece of nature's puzzle. In the variation of animals and plants under domestication, he explored heredity years before genes were understood. In the descent of man, he addressed what many had feared to ask, applying his theory not just to birds and worms, but to humans themselves. There he stated clearly, we are not separate from the natural world. We are part of it, formed by the same slow pressures, shaped by the same forces. But he also reminded readers that evolution didn't degrade humanity. It connected us to animals, to each other, to the earth. For some, this was inspiring. For others, deeply unsettling. Still, Darwin's voice remained calm, always focused on evidence, never on outrage. By now his health confined him mostly to Down House. He took long, slow walks on a gravel path he called the Sandwalk, where he thought through ideas as he watched trees shift in the wind. He observed earthworms in his garden and how they enriched the soil. Even the smallest creatures, he realized, helped shape the world. Visitors came from around the world to speak with him. Many expected a firebrand. Instead, they met a quiet man with kind eyes, always curious, always humble. He corresponded constantly, hundreds of letters full of questions, encouragement, and thoughtful replies. He listened as much as he explained. In these final decades of his life, the world had begun to shift. Young scientists embraced his ideas. Teachers introduced them in universities. Evolution was no longer a whisper. It had become a serious studied science. Darwin did not live to see all the pieces fall into place. He did not know about DNA, genetics, or the fossil discoveries yet to come. But he could sense the direction. The tide had turned, and the seeds he had planted were beginning to take root across continents, classrooms, and minds. In his final years, Charles Darwin remained the same man he had always been. Steady, curious, humble. He never stopped studying, never stopped thinking, and never stopped asking questions. He would rise each day at Down House, drink his tea, and walk the Sandwalk path, his thinking path, often several times a day. He found comfort in rhythm, in solitude, and in nature's quiet language. The world outside may have debated and dissected his ideas, but within those garden walls, Darwin simply worked. He began to write about the humblest of creatures, earthworms. Many found it odd, the great scientist now focused on worms, but to Darwin, there was no small in nature. In his book, The Formation of Vegetable Mold Through the Action of Worms, he revealed how these unseen workers quietly reshaped the earth millimeter by millimeter. It was in many ways a reflection of his own method, quiet, slow, persistent. His relationship with Emma remained deep and warm. They had weathered illness, grief, and the tension between belief and doubt. Though they differed in spiritual views, they shared love, respect, and a home filled with books, letters, and laughter from children and grandchildren. Darwin rarely spoke publicly, but his writings traveled further than he ever had. Across Europe, into the Americas, and beyond, his face appeared in caricatures and journals. School children began to learn his name. His books were translated, his ideas debated in distant languages, and yet he never saw himself as a hero or a rebel. He wrote plainly, never seeking grandeur. Even as his theories became the backbone of modern biology, Darwin often described himself as a slow thinker, someone who needed time, repetition, and careful thought. In April 1882, after years of fragile health, Charles Darwin quietly passed away at the age of 73. He was buried not in some remote grave, but in Westminster Abbey near Isaac Newton, among Britain's most honored minds. It was a rare tribute for a man once feared to have challenged the sacred, but history understood what many in his own time did not. He had not tried to destroy belief. He had tried to understand life, and he had succeeded more than he ever imagined. Today, more than a century after his death, Charles Darwin's legacy lives not only in museums or textbooks, but in the very fabric of how we understand the world. We see his fingerprints in every biology classroom, every DNA sequence, every fossil dig, every conservation effort. Evolution is no longer a theory on the margins. It is the cornerstone of modern science. It shapes how we study disease, genetics, ecosystems, and even our place in the universe. And yet, Darwin's true legacy isn't just a scientific theory. It's a way of thinking, a method, a quiet courage to observe deeply, to question inherited truths, to gather evidence with care, and to sit with uncomfortable ideas until clarity forms. Darwin never claimed to know everything. In fact, he spent most of his life focused on what he didn't know. He taught us that doubt is not weakness. It is the starting point of discovery, that nature isn't static. It's in motion, changing, adapting, evolving. He also showed us that great change often begins in silence, that revolutionary ideas can come from gardens and journals, not just podiums and crowds, that you don't need to shout to shift the world. From the Galapagos finches to the humble earthworm, from on the origin of species to 1,000 quiet walks beneath English trees, Charles Darwin was together a picture of life that still astonishes, still challenges, still invites wonder. He gave us a story not of chaos, but of connection. A story where every leaf, every feather, every fossil is a piece of something larger. A long unbroken chain stretching across time. And in that chain, we too have a place, not above nature, not outside it, but part of it, shaped by it, dependent on it, and capable like Darwin of understanding it. So tonight, as you close your eyes, let your thoughts drift, not to noise or conflict, but to a man who once stared at a beetle with childlike curiosity, and from that spark helped illuminate the story of all living things. A quiet man with revolutionary thoughts who changed how we see life itself, all far from the cities of men, high on the southern slope of Mount Parnassus. There lies a place where stone meets sky, and silence feels sacred. It is here, nestled above the valley of Phocis, that the ancient Greeks believed the voice of a god could be heard, not in thunder or wind, but in the soft, trembling words of a woman. This was Delphi, the center of the world, they said. The Amphilos, the navel of the earth. Long before Apollo's golden temple stood there, the land was sacred. To Gaia, the mother of all. Her sanctuary was guarded by a serpent named Python. But myth tells us that Apollo, young and radiant, came down from Olympus and slew the serpent with his bow. He claimed the site for himself and built a temple where the earth once whispered. From that moment forward, Delphi became the home of his oracle. But the god did not speak in his own voice. He chose a mouthpiece, a mortal woman called the Pythia. She was no queen, no scholar, no noble-born priestess. Often she came from the quiet countryside, chosen for her piety, not her power. And yet when she entered the temple and sat above the sacred fissure, the world leaned in to hear her speak. From kings and emperors to farmers and wanderers, all came with questions. And the Pythia, seated on a bronze tripod, breathing in the vapors of the earth, would give them answers, not plainly, not gently, but in riddles. Her words came like dreams, strange, layered, full of truth and danger. One asked if he should go to war. She replied, "A great empire will fall." But whose empire? That he had to decide. And many guessed wrong. Another asked about wealth. She said, "He who seeks gold may find a tomb." Were her words prophecy or clever poetry? Were they divine insights or the genius of ambiguity? That mystery is part of her power. What cannot be explained is often most revered. And at Delhi for over 1,000 years, one woman after another took the seat of the oracle, and the world listened, breath held as the gods spoke through human voice. To become the oracle of Delphi was not a path of ambition. It was a calling, quiet, sacred, and irreversible. The woman chosen as the Pythia was not draped in gold or worshipped as a goddess. She was respected, certainly, but her power was not her own. She was a vessel, a bridge, between the human and the divine, and before she ever spoke a single word of prophecy, she underwent rituals that stripped away ego and identity. In the earliest days, the Pythia was a young virgin thought to be pure in the eyes of the gods, closer to spiritual truth. But one tale tells of a Thalian man who came seeking a prophecy, and upon seeing the young oracle abducted her. It was a warning, a fracture in the veil between mortal and divine. From then on, the role was reserved for older women, often widows drawn from simple village life, with no family or ambition to distract them from the god's voice. Once chosen, she lived apart from the world. She bathed in the sacred Castalian spring to cleanse herself both in body and spirit. She fasted, meditated, and dressed in plain white robes. There was no crown, no throne, just stillness. On the appointed days, usually the 7th of each month, Apollo's sacred number, she would enter the Adyton, the inner sanctum beneath the temple.